flop, boo, tomato, hiss. Hello, welcome to the video. My name is Cara if you're new here, and I was actually planning on doing a completely different video this week, something a little bit more frivolous, like recommending books based on your star sign or something like that. And I will still do that, but this week felt a lot more solemn than a frivolous video like that would not feel appropriate for me. So I wanted to do something a little bit different, and I wanted to have this video to be a safe space in a couple of different regards, but mostly just as a place where you can come if you are feeling absolutely hopeless and just want to find some comfort, some advice, some refuge in the form of some books that I would like to recommend to you. I'm going to be talking about a couple of different books for this video. Mostly I'm trying to focus on books written by Black American women because I believe that they have just quite simply always been on the right side of history. I hope that these books will be some comfort to you, knowing that someone else has experienced this and has made art out of it and done something beautiful with their lives, even though it is a horrible situation. So that's one type of book that I would like to recommend. Others are just books written by queer authors or authors who really understand how horrible any form of censorship or bigotry or any kind of phobia or ism is, how damaging it can be to many different people. So I hope you find some hope in these books as well. And at the end I'll also talk about some books that I personally haven't read yet but that I would really like to read and that I think fall under this category. I'm not American, I feel like I should say. You can hear I'm not American, I'm South African. I mean, South Africa has a very sore and difficult history with race, and I studied history when I was at university because this was so important to me to understand and to form my own opinions about it. I am living in a country that has a lot of these tensions in itself, and I have found a lot of comfort in these books. The first book that I want to recommend for this is one that I read very recently, and I actually did a reading vlog on this book as well, so if you want to know way more in detail my thoughts on this book, you can go and watch that. You don't have to, but if you want to, it's maybe just a comfort place for you to go as well. And the book is Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. Zora Neale Hurston was a Black American writer living in the American South in the early 20th century. She writes a lot in modernist style, so her style can be a little bit dense sometimes. There's a lot of stream of consciousness. When she writes dialogue, she writes it phonetically. But I think this is such a fantastic story. It follows the main character, Janie, who marries 3 different men throughout her life. And it follows her interactions with these men and the women in her life who convince her or encourage her or force her to marry these men. It mostly takes place within Black communities, and really big part, I think, of what Zora Neale Hurston is trying to depict here is about how Black communities can really be affected by the racial tensions that exist between white and Black communities. So even within oppressed communities, oppression still finds a way to manifest itself, and oppression breeds oppression, but that love breeds love. And I think this is a beautiful book that talks about that particular topic, also about the psychological scars of slavery. It talks about how women find agency in their lives. It is a fantastic book. Toni Morrison and Alice Walker have also cited this book as a book that they really love. And speaking of Toni Morrison, I've actually only read one of Toni Morrison's books, and it is probably the saddest book that I've ever read in my life, but it is so beautiful. I think about it constantly. I read it when I was at university, so it's been a couple of years now. It is called The Bluest Eye, and it follows the main character, Pekala Breedlove, who is a young Black girl who lives in a community where there are Black and white people, and she's friends with a white girl, and she keeps comparing herself to the white girl, and the book really centers on beauty standards, how they are so Eurocentric and how damaging that is to the psyche of young Black girls, because the beauty standards are so Eurocentric in America and in so much of the media that comes out of America. That's normally what we associate with like goodness and purity. Toni Morrison's writing is indescribable. She is very economic with her words. Every single word you can truly see is there for a reason. As the story progresses in The Bluest Eye, we just see how Pecola's entire sense of self unravels. If you read The Bluest Eye, it will stick with you forever. Another book by a Black American woman that I also read at university and that I absolutely loved was I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings by Maya Angelou. This is Maya Angelou's memoir. Maya Angelou is actually a poet, but she decided to write her memoir over the course of a couple of books. This is the first book in her memoir cycle. I guess you would say it's probably not a series, but this is the first book and it details her childhood, growing up with her brother and her grandmother, and the experiences that she has as a young Black girl and into her teenage years, and the different relationships that she has with people and the traumas that she experiences as a young child. She reflects a lot about these and sort of tries to come to terms with why this has impacted her so much. Maya Angelou's writing style is you can tell that she's a poet. It's so easy to follow. It has a very nice rhythm. So even though it is written quite a while ago, like I think in the 60s, it's still a very readable book. It feels modern and it just feels so important. And another book by Maya Angelou that I've read is her most famous poetry collection called Still I Rise, which has the extremely famous poem that is the title of the book as well. Each poem is so beautiful to read. It is easy to follow. It's not like dense language or anything. They fit into each other so well. They flow so well. I think I read it in 1 or 2 sittings because they just flowed so well. I just wanted to keep reading. It's hard, but it's important and I loved it and I hope you do too. Another book that I read earlier this year, I actually read this book in the wake of Harvey Weinstein's flop, boo, tomato, hiss of his case being overturned, was This Is Pleasure by Mary Gateskill. She wrote this novella in reaction to the Me Too movement, and it gave such an interesting perspective on the Me Too movement in terms of how women who have abusers in their lives, who didn't necessarily abuse them, but they are aware of abuse that this person has inflicted upon other people, how you reckon with having that person in your life, knowing them in the relationship that you have with them, but also knowing what they have done because others have accused them. It's a split narrative. It follows the 2 main characters, the man and the woman, the man who has been accused of sexual assault and the woman who is his colleague and friend, and some other women in his life as well, like his wife and people like that, who are trying to just come to terms with being associated with an abuser and trying to figure out what they are supposed to do, how they are supposed to act. It is an amazing novella. I think it really unpacks so much themes and nuances and details of the Me Too movement that a lot of other writing that I've read about it hasn't. So it's definitely a good one to look at, especially in terms of the everything that is happening. The next book that I want to recommend is actually one that's not set in America. It is set in Palestine and it is Minor Detail by Adania Shibli. It's so unsettling and upsetting, but it is such an important book. It focuses so deeply on the history of oppression and how that usually manifests in the oppression and abuse and assault of women. This story in particular is split into 2 parts. The first part is a Israeli soldier, disgusting human by the way, like human is a strong word. We follow his perspective in a close third person, and that part follows in the late 1940s after the Nakba, who some Israeli soldiers find a Palestinian girl who is like lost basically, and they abduct her, and I think you can guess what happens next, and then they kill her. Then a couple decades later, in the early 2000s, there is a Palestinian girl who finds out about this terrible event that happened, and the date of the event actually coincides with her birthday. So she feels very connected to this Palestinian girl who was raped and murdered earlier in the Israeli occupation. And she becomes absolutely obsessed with figuring out why this happened, this minor detail in history happened, and why no one talks about it. And she tries to find out more information about it. The Palestinian woman's perspective is told in the first person, which was a really interesting switch in the narrative. I really enjoyed it because the first part felt very like distanced and detached and almost like clinical. And the second part, where the Palestinian woman is trying to find out information about this terrible event, it feels so engaged and urgent. It's so well done. This is a fantastic book. It's not very long, so it won't take you a long time, but it is difficult, I will say that, which you can probably just tell from the subject matter, but it is so worth it. Then I wanted to also recommend some poetry because I feel very comforted anytime I read poetry, especially when I read my favourite poet, Mary Oliver. Mary Oliver was a queer poet. She's especially well known for being able to connect the human experience with the natural world, how people can use the natural world to heal, to see themselves in, to just feel more connected to who they are as a person. This collection in particular really focuses on Mary Oliver's experiences as a child coming to terms with her queerness, the abuse that she suffered from people close to her in her life because of her queerness, how she tries to reconcile with her identity as an adult, and just how she tries to reclaim who she is through connecting with nature. This is a beautiful collection of poems. It's very difficult at times, but it is, well, I'm sensing a theme with the books, difficult books, but important books to read. Then we have one of my favorite non-fiction books. It's a memoir, and it is Happening by Annie Ernaux. Happening documents Annie Ernaux's experience getting an abortion in Paris in the 1960s. How difficult it was for her to get the abortion, how traumatized she felt because of how little help she had been given. This memoir in particular was written, I think, in the late 90s, so about 30 years after the abortion took place. Annie Ernaux takes fragments from her diaries that she wrote during this time in order to reflect on this experience that she had. And I think this is such an effective way to tell her story, because not only is she taking us basically day by day through her experiences and her thoughts and her feelings and her conflicts that she has within herself and with other people around her who she deigns to tell, she also reflects on why she was feeling that way and how she feels about the way she was feeling then in the present moment. This is an amazing book. It is the best argument for abortion that I have ever seen in my entire life. I think it's such an important book for every single person to read. My last book recommendation for books that I have read before is my favorite book probably of all time. I have probably read this book 6 or 7 times, and that book is The Book Thief by Markus. I think most people probably know what this book is about, but if you don't, The Book Thief follows Liesel Memminger, who is a German girl whose mother and father can't take care of her anymore, and she is sent to a foster home where she lives with Hans and Rosa Huberman. And it is just about Liesel's experiences growing up in the Second World War in Germany, and she learns to read. She steals books. She befriends a little boy who also lives on the street called Rudi Steiner. Their relationship is so lovely. I love them so much. They are some of my favorite characters in fiction. There's another character called Max Vandenberg, who is a Jew who comes to live in their basement because he obviously is on the run. The interesting thing about this book as well is that it is narrated by death, like literally like the Grim Reaper. And it is so well done. Like, it sounds like it's going to be really like esoteric and weird, but it's just brilliant. It's so good. I can't even really explain why this book is so wonderful. It just touches on absolutely everything that I think is important to me, which is the importance of books and reading and writing and helping people and being brave and trying your best to be kind even in extremely difficult circumstances. Markus Zusak's writing is so vivid. There are so many lines that I just recall constantly from this book. It's amazing. I love this book so much, and I hope that you enjoy it if you have never read it before. If I'm sitting in a slightly different place from before, it's because I had to get up because I remembered one more book that I wanted to talk about for the last part of the video, which is books that I want to read in the future that are, I believe, very relevant topics for today's video. The first one that I wanted to talk about is Beloved by Toni Morrison. I bought this book very, very recently, literally last weekend, and I'm so excited to read it because I really want to read more Toni Morrison. I think she's one of the smartest people that has ever lived. It is about when slavery ends in America and how the psychological scars of that time still linger, that manifests in this ghost of the child that haunts their mother. And I'm really excited to read this because I think I'm going to learn so much and be so moved by this book. If you've read it, please let me know what your thoughts were. Another book that I want to read, or this one actually I want to continue reading it because I started, but I'm like halfway at this point, is Women, Race and Class by Angela Davis. The essays in this book that I've read so far are some of the best nonfiction that I've ever read in my entire life. They are so well researched, they are so well substantiated, they are so well executed. Every single essay focuses on a different aspect of American history and how it impacted or was influenced even by Black American women, or how it really destroyed a part of their community. And it's an amazing book. It was written, I think, in the 70s. Yeah, it was published in 1981, so I think it was written in the 70s, the different essays. Angela Davis's voice is so clear, it's so persistent. I feel like it gives me such a good way to argue for the things that she argues for in this book, you know, gender equality, racial equality, class equality. I definitely want to continue reading this book. So in Women, Race and Class, Angela Davis actually recommends another book by another author, which is a novel. It is called Corregidora by Gayle Jones. Like I've mentioned before, I usually like to go in blind to books, so I'll just read Angela Davis's description of Corregidora. It is a novel by a young Black woman which chronicles the attempts of several generations of women to preserve the evidence of the sexual crimes committed during slavery. Which I wish was something that was further in the past, but that feels extremely present today. So I don't know exactly how this book is going to make me feel, but I think it is going to make me feel things that I have to feel even if I don't want to. And I think that will be important for now. Another nonfiction book that I would really like to read in the coming months is Caliban and the Witch by Sylvia Federici. This book in particular really focuses on the intersection between women and class in other ways than I believe Angela Davis grapples with that same topic in her book. Sylvia Federici in particular is a feminist writer who really focuses on that intersection between gender and class and how capitalism is a vehicle for misogyny and patriarchal ideals to thrive. So I think this is obviously a really important book to read in that regard. It was published quite a while ago as well, which that is a really concerning theme with a lot of these books. This book focuses in particular the woman's body and how it is viewed as an object basically under capitalism throughout history, and what we can learn from that and how we can change that in the future. The last book that I own that I want to talk about is Ejaculate Responsibly by Gabrielle Blair, which is a new way in which to argue for abortion. And I obviously haven't read this book yet, but from what I've read about this book in reviews and from the blurb, it really just gives you a lot of language to be able to argue for abortion, to be able to communicate your thoughts on the topic in a very nuanced and research-backed way. There are two more books that I would really like to read as well that I think will be really important just to center myself and to find some comfort and guidance. And the first one is by James Baldwin, who is an author that I've always wanted to read. I've never read any of his books before, but I've listened to a lot of his interviews that he's done and read some of the things that he wrote for the Paris Review in the past. I think he was just an incredible speaker and thought maker. I think he had such a fantastic way of expressing himself and talking about race and gender and sexuality. I think he was just a genius, so I'm really looking forward to reading all of his books. The one that I would like to pick up first is The Fire Next Time, but I mean, honestly, whatever book I find of him first in the bookstores at this point, I'm going to pick up and read. If you've read any of his books before, please let me know which are your favourites and I'll keep an eye out for those ones. The last book that I want to talk about is one by Audre Lorde, who is another author who I've listened to a lot of interviews and read a lot of articles that she wrote in her life. And I really want to read Your Silence Will Not Protect You, which is a essay collection just about being a Black woman in America and how to reckon with that, what she calls a double bind that Black women have to face in being both Black and oppressed in that way and women and oppressed in that way, and how neither Black consciousness movements nor women's freedom movements have really helped Black women in particular, because they have been more focused on liberation for Black men or liberation for white women, but how Black women often fall between the cracks. So those are all the books that I would like to recommend for today's video, for comfort, for guidance, for just something that you can reach for in this time in which it feels impossible that there are any solutions at all. I really hope that you are taking care of yourself and that you are making sure to reach out to people in your life who are vulnerable and just let them know that you are there for them if you can, if that is something that you're able to do. I really hope that this channel can just be a safe space for you to come to if you just want to escape into something completely different. I hope you enjoy these books, find them helpful if you read any of them, and I will let you know what I think of the books that I haven't read yet when I do read them. Let me know what books you are reading during this time. That's everything from me for this week's video. Thank you for watching. Take care of yourselves.